Let's start with the question, do you look in the mirror often? Yes, often, you say, and I won't argue. Every person is used to seeing himself in the mirror. Some have accepted themselves, some haven't. Some have realized themselves, some haven't. Another question is, do you often look at others, observe them, try to understand them? Here it is more difficult to answer. We don't always find the strength to see and hear the other truly. But as difficult as it may be, it is possible. Literature, theater, film, and music help us in this. However, how often does the organism that is formed of human beings look at itself? How often does all of humanity, our civilization, look at itself? I bet we still haven't looked at ourselves that way. This whole huge civilizational system has not reflected on its existence. There are no other civilizations around whose fate we could observe, whose mistakes we could look at from the outside and draw conclusions. That's the problem. Just imagine, tomorrow you wake up and learn that extraterrestrial life has been discovered. What would change for you? I suggest we don't consider extreme scenarios from popular science fiction just yet. The first aliens we discover are likely to be microorganisms, not a space fleet suddenly blocking the sky, but bacteria, alien bacteria, not a radio signal from a distant star system or the ruins of a long-dead alien civilization. Well, let's imagine ourselves at the point where alien life is discovered. What would such a discovery change in our lives? Would it strengthen our faith in God, in science, or weaken it? In today's academic philosophy, interest in alien life is viewed with some skepticism. According to some philosophers, it is a historical anomaly, an anachronism. After all, even the ancient Greeks argued that every possible form of life must be reproduced infinitely many times in an infinite universe. In the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, when astronomy showed that our Earth is just another planet and our Sun is just another star, the default hypothesis among enlightened observers was that the universe is full of habitable planets and intelligent life. But let's still go back and try to imagine the implications of the discovery of extraterrestrial life. We know that once upon a time life originated in the universe. Why would it be a watershed moment to learn that it has occurred many times, and not just on Earth? The reason is that the discovery of life beyond Earth would dramatically change our view of the universe. At any given time, humans will only know a tiny fragment of our galaxy, let alone the entire universe. And if life arose only once on this small sample, then it is possible that life and everything it gives rise to on Earth is unique. However, imagine that we learned that life arose twice, once on Earth and a second time somewhere else. It follows that life must have arisen many times in different galaxies. The discovery will teach us that the emergence of life in our universe under certain conditions is imminent and fundamental. But if we find evidence of intelligent life on another planet, we will be forced to conclude that intelligence is also fundamental. The discussions surrounding the Fermi paradox are many. To date, there is no unequivocal confirmation of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, despite the vast number of space objects that could potentially be habitable, despite the fact that the design of life is fairly well understood. Life works according to the chemical, biological, and physical laws we have studied. The universe is incredibly vast. In our galaxy alone, there are no more than 1/1,000,000,000th of all the stars in the universe. So there could be 50 sextillion potentially habitable planets in the entire observable universe. Even if we throw out 90% of the contenders, saying that red dwarfs have too stable a climate, which may lead to slower evolution of life, there are still 5 billion trillion places for complex life to arise. The universe is almost 14 billion years old, and possibly even more. According to a study published in 2023, the age of the universe is 26,700,000,000 years. This estimate was proposed by Professor Rajendra Gupta. He developed an alternative cosmological model that explains the origin of the oldest stars and evolved galaxy that the James Webb Telescope found in the early universe. The authors of the study suggested rethinking the concept of redshift, a phenomenon associated with the removal of observable objects due to the expansion of the universe. According to them, It occurs because photons gradually lose energy over vast cosmic distances. Scientists also suggested that the fundamental physical constants governing the interactions between particles could have changed over time. In this case, the time of formation of the first galaxies found by Webb could be not millions, as previously thought, but billions of years. It should be noted that this hypothesis challenges the dominant cosmological model and has not yet been peer-reviewed. Over the billions of years of our universe's existence, an unimaginable number of galaxies, stars, and planets have appeared. On some of these planets, conditions for life may exist, and on some of them for intelligent life, the emergence of civilization. So why have we still found no signs of extraterrestrial intelligence? This question was posed in 1950 by physicist Enrico Fermi and became known as the Fermi paradox. Since then, scientific philosophers have offered many possible answers to this paradox, but none of them have yet become definitive and convincing. The menu of hypotheses that could explain this paradox is varied, but there are radical hypotheses like astrophysicist John Ball's zoo hypothesis, according to which we see no traces of extraterrestrial civilizations because they deliberately avoid contact with us. According to this hypothesis, alien communities have long known about life on Earth, but they prefer to observe and not interfere, and they will make contact when we reach a certain level of development. Or the planetarium hypothesis, a computer simulation by philosopher Nick Bostrom. The planetarium hypothesis suggests that we live in a computer simulation created by an extraterrestrial civilization for some purpose. There are also more prosaic hypotheses, like the unique Earth hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that the emergence of intelligent life requires unique conditions that are extremely rare in the universe. Life on Earth appeared due to a combination of many factors: location in a habitable zone, the presence of liquid water, a special atmosphere, and so on. Perhaps the conditions for the development of civilization have only appeared on our planet. Perhaps we and our home are completely unique and all alone. While the isolation hypothesis suggests that other intelligent life forms in the universe exist but are in complete isolation from each other, this could be due to the vast distances between planets or the fact that civilizations evolve in different time frames and do not overlap, and so as not to stretch the enumeration of items on this menu to infinity. I'll name the last one. The Great Filter. Civilization, which has reached a high level of development, sooner or later creates two dangerous technologies, which eventually lead to self-destruction. According to this version, sooner or later an advanced civilization can be destroyed by a lethal weapon or a virus created in a laboratory. In one of Discovery programs in 2010, Stephen Hawking expressed an alarming idea that the meeting with extraterrestrial intelligence fraught with a real catastrophe for humanity. The idea is not original at all. It began to develop rapidly with the novel War of the Worlds by Herbert Wells, written in 1897. This book has become an absolute classic. Evil invaders from the expanses of the universe. The writer depicted the Martians. It can be said that this book marked the beginning of the era of invasions on Earth. The novel became a real Bible for several generations of writers, inspired many outstanding researchers to engage in science. The work of scientists and science fiction writers has always been very closely related, and often scientists and writers combine these professions. The same Wells was a biologist by training and in addition to literature, seriously worked on the main specialty. Isaac Asimov trained as a chemist. Arthur Clarke graduated from King's College London with degrees in physics and mathematics. Boris Strugatsky graduated from LSU and worked as an astronomer. And Ivan Efremov was a world-renowned paleontologist. The list goes on for a long time. How dangerous can the actual detection of not just extraterrestrial life, but an extraterrestrial civilization be? How would an Earth civilization behave if it looked at itself in the mirror? On the screen, aliens appear to us in the face of punishers of unreasonable earthlings in the best style of the Old Testament, soulless and greedy hordes of evil demons or arrogant and selfish gods. Throughout history, humans, personifying higher powers, have endowed them with their own biological and cultural characteristics. These forces can be either more powerful and intelligent than us or less evolved. Messengers of other worlds can be greedy, cynical, and arrogant. However, they can also be humane, compassionate, and honest. These qualities certainly depend on the civilizational level of development of the aliens. Hawking's pessimism in envisioning our first encounter with an extraterrestrial civilization is easy to explain. Hawking bases his assumptions about the fatal outcome on the tragic experience of mankind. He reminds us of the sad cases of advanced Old World civilizations colliding with less advanced New World civilizations. If aliens arrive, the consequences could be as tragic as they were for the Indians after Columbus arrived in the Americas. Stephen Hawking. This analogy has already become commonplace in popular culture. Similar examples can be observed in the wild, where different groups of animals compete for the same ecological niche. If we look at the history of life on Earth as a whole, it is clear that the means of competition for these niches have evolved, but the motivation remains roughly the same: self-preservation and reproduction. The greater the similarity between living beings, the stronger is the aggressiveness of the stronger group towards the weaker one. The trouble with the Indians of the New World was that they were human and occupied the same ecological niche that the colonizers sought to exploit. To aliens evolved in a different ecological environment, Earth's climate is likely to seem no more attractive than Antarctica's climate was to the discoverers. One can hope that interstellar colonizers will simply have no reason to stage Armageddon over Earthlings due to the lack of a common food and resource base. It would be naive to believe that intelligent life is an inevitable result of the evolution of life on any planet with a developed biosphere. So the scenario of two intelligent civilizations meeting from the only two inhabited planets in the galaxy is almost unbelievable. If there is still intelligent life somewhere in our galaxy, there are even more uninhabited living planets not populated by intelligent beings. And as for our planet's other resources, even the most successful marketer would have a pretty hard time convincing aliens not to fly past our trove of minerals. Most of the Earth's crustal resources are abundant in the asteroid belt, on Mars and Mercury. On Titan, aliens could well refuel with hydrocarbons, in the Kuiper belt with water. And all this without the need to spend extra energy lifting similar resources from the surface of a massive planet like Earth. And they would hardly make a gravitational maneuver in the system of such a star as the Sun, which has a rather powerful gravitational field, when 70% of the stellar assortment of the galaxy is represented in the form of red and brown dwarfs, less energy expenditure, and much greater choice of planets. Why does such a cosmological expert and thinker make such baselessly pessimistic predictions, and where there is no convincing reason to do so? The answer is simple. Hawking imagines that humanity, as if will meet with another humanity in the person of representatives of extraterrestrial civilization. The scientific authority of a scientist cannot be all-encompassing. Modern science has come so far that even within the framework of physics, scientists of different specialties can have a vague idea of the subject of research of their colleagues. Therefore, it would be strange to demand objectivity from a brilliant but still physicist on problems covering history, biology, and geology. From this point of view, Hawking's hypothesis should be perceived as his personal opinion, not conclusions obtained by the scientific method, which those who create popular science content forget to mention in the pursuit of ratings. Science, enlightenment, and then science fiction fulfilled an important function. They changed the way mankind viewed reality. If the Middle Ages were turned to the past, to the gates of the abandoned Eden, and in the future only the apocalypse and the Last Judgment were seen, the Renaissance started the reverse process. The future was now gradually transformed into an attainable, more perfect reality. The mind from a receptacle of vicious thoughts becomes an instrument of progress. But the inertia of archaic thinking has not disappeared and still drags its tail behind us. The aliens were destined to grab this tail. Why have aliens from distant worlds so firmly settled in our consciousness? What do we want from them? Why do we fear them and look forward to this encounter? If for ancient philosophers life on another planet was an intellectual game, an attempt to imagine a different society, then for modern man aliens have gradually replaced the gods. People used to think that there was heaven in heaven, and hell under the earth. But then man looked through a telescope and saw neither God nor angels. Then he went up into the sky, flew to the moon, and saw that it was empty. Through the microscope, man saw bacteria and viruses that caused disease. They used to think it was a punishment from above. Now people know why hurricanes, floods, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes happen. They used to think it was the gods punishing people. Now there is a scientific explanation for all this. The more extensive and more accurate our knowledge of the universe became, the more elusive was the hope for the existence of a better world, inhabited by just and all-powerful patrons of man. The aliens came in very handy here. After all, mythological thinking has not left us and will never leave us. Man will always believe in miracles, higher wisdom superior to his own, and so will be and constantly modifying to create images of carriers of this power and wisdom. The aliens have all the traits that people use to give gods. They're smarter than we are. Their civilizations are millions of years old, and the motives of guests from outer space often cannot comprehend the most ingenious inhabitants of Earth. Sometimes the superior race doesn't even pay attention to us. The invasion of a civilization reflecting us will mean zeroing in on the importance of local conflicts, turning all ideological and territorial disputes upside down. But there is hope that, in the face of invaders symmetrical to us, we might be united by the fact that we are humans, humanity. What is not divine intervention? But perhaps we have overreached in our thinking. That's what the very attempt to imagine another civilization, the very attempt to imagine that our civilization will look at itself in the mirror, can lead to. In this issue, will you learn how civilizations evolve? What helps some civilizations to defeat others? What does the balance of power on the world stage depend on? What are the types of civilizations? And what can mankind reach? To understand the anatomy of civilization, the purpose of this issue, get ready. Before we continue, don't forget to give us a like, leave a comment, share this video with your loved ones. 6 blind wise men wanted to know what an elephant was. They went to it and began to feel it. The first one took hold of the elephant's trunk and said, "An elephant is a kind of hose." The second touched the leg and stated, "No, he looks more like a tree." The third fumbled with the tail and decided, "You're both wrong. An elephant is like a rope." The fourth wise man felt the ear and objected, "It looks more like an fan." The fifth touched the tusk and exclaimed, "No, it's like a saw." The sixth wise man, who had felt the elephant's back, fought and said, "You are all wrong. He is just like a wall." They argued for a long time, but never reached a consensus. Such a parable. Everything, literally everything, depends on the point of view, optics and prism of perception. What is civilization? Civilization, from Latin civilis, civil, state, in general philosophical meaning, a social form of movement of matter, ensuring its stability and ability to self-development through self-regulation, exchange with the environment. In this case, we look at civilization on the scale of the cosmic device, in the historical meaning, the unity of the historical process and the totality of material, technical and spiritual achievements of living beings. Here we look at civilization in the context of the history of the planet. One can perceive civilization as a stage of development of social consciousness. One can also think of it as a society. As you might have guessed, I am closest to the general philosophical point of view. Therefore, we will understand civilization as a social, public matter consisting of a large number of living, intelligent beings, which is in constant motion. But what determines the movement of this matter? What does it depend on? Why do some civilizations have everything and others have nothing? Because we have only one civilization at our research disposal so far, we are forced to study ourselves. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the ideas of humanism elevated man in his own eyes to such an extent that his superiority over nature seemed immutable and obvious. The technological breakthrough of the 20th century only reinforced this feeling. By the beginning of the 21st century, however, it was clear that nature could fight back. There are incurable infections. The The seas are drying up. The balance of the planet is being disturbed by the burning of oil. All of this is reminiscent of the already mentioned historical relationship between Western European civilizations and the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and Australia. The enlightened representatives of the empire built on bones like to speculate about their own superiority. All sorts of racial theories justifying the white man's triumph over peoples of color were the norm up until World War II and still hold sway over minds today. But since the second half of the 20th century, the cultural vector has changed. The megalomania has been replaced by white guilt, paranoid sense of guilt that permeates the attitude of a white Englishman, German, or American with fellow citizens of a different skin color. Where does this issue come from? Different civilizations on our planet developed in different ways. Someone acquired a master position. Someone acquired a slave position. This is the reason for the civilizational imbalance, which has not been comprehended for a long time. It is believed that the most significant contribution to the collective psychotherapy of Western civilization was made by this man. His name is Jared Diamond. His contribution is proof of the direct link between the environment and the development of civilization. In his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, Diamond explores why some societies have become dominant and others have been left behind. The book is structured as a detailed answer to a simple question once posed to Diamond in Papua New Guinea, where he was conducting research first on birds and then on the New Guineans themselves. The island peoples have a word, cargo, by which they designate all the good that whites bring there, that is, anything from matches to airplanes. Why did you whites, a local politician asked Diamond, accumulate so much cargo and bring it to New Guinea, and we blacks have so little cargo of our own? For Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond won the 1997 Phi Beta Kappa Award for Science and the 1998 Pulitzer Prize for General Popular Science Writing, in recognition of his powerful synthesis of many disciplines. In time, Guns, Germs, and Steel will become a global bestseller. It will be included in the compilation of must-read books by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Diamond's text about the competition of historical systems and the laws by which human societies exist. In this sense, its appeal to the ever-competitive entrepreneur is quite obvious. Guns, Germs, and Steel is a brilliant exploration of historical logic, the mechanism of expansion that resulted in, for example, Europeans conquering the Americas rather than the other way around. It is impossible to outline all of Diamond's meticulous deductions in 2 words, but if you try, the essence is in the chronology of the development of methods of food production, agriculture, and animal husbandry. The earlier agriculture emerges on a certain territory, the faster other technologies emerge there, as well as population density increases, and the intensity of aggressions and wars increases. On the territory of Eurasia, agriculture emerged earlier, spread more easily, and its products were more nutritionally complete. This, in turn, can be explained by the large number of wild plants and animals suitable for domestication, the vast territory, and the continent's extension from east to west. Because Eurasia is stretched in an east-west direction, it has larger zones of roughly similar climate than the Americas or Africa, over which emerging agricultural technologies could easily spread between neighboring settlements. The merit of Jared Diamond is that he has brought to light a question that Western culture has pushed into the dark depths of the subconscious. If all people are the same, how come white people are all cargo? Without a proper answer to this question, it is impossible to get rid of the idea that white people must be different in some way, whether by the favor of the gods or by the properties of their brains. Only by finding an objective justification for the obvious exceptionalism of Western civilization can we get rid of this underlying racism. To understand the process of civilizational matter movement, I chose this particular book, this particular person, for a reason. Why do some peoples, historical systems, or religions flourish, while others fail and forever pass from the stage of history? Why in the modern world do some dominate and others squat? Clearly, traditional history provides answers to these questions that are either inarticulate and unworkable or too obvious to be practical. For example, the Americans dominate, because they have atomic weapons and lots of money, while the natives have only kangaroo teeth and digging sticks. Sometimes historians' explanations go into the maze of peculiarities of European culture, the fate of the Christian tradition, and similar extremely vague matters, which in principle do not give an opportunity to trace cause and effect relations between events. But such explanations provide an excuse for ideological programming. The book Guns, Germs, and Steel is about the competition of historical systems and the laws by which human collectives exist both in the Stone Age and in the 21st century. Guns, Germs, and Steel is a reflection on the historical path that humans have traveled across continents in the 30,000 years since the end of the last ice age. Already by 3000 BC, some peoples of Eurasia and North America had developed written languages, established centralized states, lived in cities, and were engaged in metalworking. At the same time, people on other continents had not yet reached this level of development. The peoples of North and South America and of sub-Saharan Africa had been advancing to this level of development for 5 millennia, while the indigenous populations of Australia, for example, had not been able to overcome the Stone Age on their own. By 1500, when European colonial expansion began, the technological and political backwardness of some peoples from others was evident. This backwardness shaped the course of history and led to inequalities that persist to this day. The main idea of the book is that human societies have developed differently on different continents, not because of the biological superiority of some peoples over others, but as a result of different living conditions. The transition from hunting and gathering to food production, pastoralism, and agriculture was a turning point in human history. The uneven spread of this process led to divergence in the trajectories of their development. On the example of terrestrial human civilizations, we can understand the objective mechanisms of development of civilizational matter. According to archaeological excavations, about 7 million years ago, there was a division of the population of African primates into 3 branches, including human. Humans began to disperse towards Southeast Asia. During this period, they had not yet reached Australia and the Americas. At this stage, there is no evidence of any cultural traits in these Homo sapiens, other than the ability to use fire. Neanderthals, who lived in Europe and Western Asia about 140,000 years ago, already had an altered skeleton and were the first to leave clear evidence of customs. The turning point, the Great Leap Forward, occurred about 50,000 years ago. Stone functional tools and the first jewelry found at ancient human sites in East Africa, as well as in the Middle East and southwestern Europe, testify to the evolution of thought. In the same period, the expansion of the geographical range of man began. The colonization of Australia and New Guinea. This can be considered a historical milestone. Such colonization was not possible without sea vessels. To date, this is the earliest known evidence of their use. In other regions, the development of seafaring does not begin until 30,000 years later in the Mediterranean. Active settlement of the cold regions of Eurasia, including Siberia, is associated with mastery of the technologies necessary for survival in cold climates. All of this dates back to a period beginning 20,000 years ago. The first colonization of the Americas occurred between 35,000 and 14,000 years ago. Around the 2nd millennium BC, the indigenous peoples of the Americas spread across the upper Arctic Circle, after which only the farthest islands of the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Antarctica remained uninhabited. We can draw an important conclusion. By the 11th millennium BC, no human society on any of the continents possessed clear advantages that could predetermine a faster rate of development than the others. Food production or the domestication of wild animals and plants did not appear until about 11,000 years ago. Previously, hunting and gathering were the main ways of obtaining food. The manner and speed of transition varied among peoples, and many, such as the Aborigines of Australia, never adopted agriculture. With the development of agrarian production, the yield of calories per unit area increased from 0.1 to 90%. Feeding 100 times as many people as hunting and gathering. Cultivated plants were used to produce clothing and household items, and livestock were used as a source of meat, milk, and fertilizer, as well as draught power. Domesticated horses, Donkeys, yaks, reindeer, and camels revolutionized the development of society, becoming the main means of transportation and military advantage. The results of the transition to food production were a sedentary way of life, in contrast to hunter-gatherers, reduction of the interval between births of offspring from 4 to 2 years, and the possibility to feed them, storage of food surpluses, which allowed to keep professional craftsmen, warriors, and leaders in egalitarian societies of hunter-gatherers. They simply could not be fed. The emergence and development of agriculture shows unevenness in different parts of the world. In some major regions of the Earth, such as the Arctic regions and southwestern North America, the Eurasian polar regions, and the deserts of Central Australia, its emergence was impossible for ecological reasons. On the other hand, even in regions that are now the world's leading agricultural centers, such as California and other Pacific Ocean states of the United States, the Argentine Pampa, southwestern and southeastern Australia, and much of the South African Cape, food production was not developed until the beginning of the modern era. Many areas where farming originated are now not only no longer traditional breadbaskets, but also show signs of ecological decline, such as Iraq, Iran, Mexico, the Andes, and parts of China. Those nations that came early to food production also came early to technological development. The inequalities that emerged then were the beginning of a long series of conflicts between rich and poor in world history. According to Jared Diamond, geography was a major factor in determining the speed and success of the adaptation of agriculture and pastoralism in new regions. The Americas and Africa are predominantly stretched in a north-south direction, which is much greater than their east-west extent. Eurasia, on the other hand, has a more horizontal orientation, oriented mainly along an east-west axis. Because of this feature, as well as landscape and environmental barriers, the spread of agriculture across different latitudes on the American and African continents has proven more difficult than in Eurasia, despite the relatively small distances involved. These same difficulties have affected other technologies and innovations: writing, metallurgy, dairy farming, fruit tree breeding, brewing, and winemaking. Infectious diseases have accompanied humanity for millennia. Smallpox, influenza, malaria, plague, measles, and cholera. All these and many other diseases are of animal origin and became viral to humans thanks to the emergence of cattle breeding and agriculture about 10,000 years ago, when people began to come into close contact with animals. Zoonosis, that is, the adaptation of an animal disease to humans, made mass epidemics possible for societies of farmers and pastoralists who were sedentary and had high population densities. This phenomenon came to be known as the disease of crowding. In contrast, among small communities of hunter-gatherers, the probability of spreading infection was low because of their frequent changes of habitat and small numbers. This made nomadic peoples immune to infection. As cities and world trade routes developed, diseases of crowding became more common. By the time the Roman Empire flourished, they had spread throughout Europe, Asia, and North Africa, having a significant impact on the outcome of wars and the lives of entire peoples. Eurasian microbes played a key role in the extermination of indigenous peoples, not only in the Americas, but also of Pacific Islanders, Aboriginal Australians, and the Khoisan peoples of South Africa. Mortality rates in first contacts with Eurasian pathogens ranged from 50 to 100%. Another important consequence of the transition to agriculture was the creation of a written language. The independent emergence of writing is a rare phenomenon. It was observed mainly in the centers of food production, where the necessary prerequisites for it, various institutions, social stratification, and centralized political structure, emerged. Early writing systems were used for household and administrative record-keeping. Their creators and carriers were professional scribes whose lives and work were supported by food supplies. The independent emergence of Sumerian cuneiform writing at the end of the 4th millennium BC and the writing of the Indians of Central America in 600 BC is known. According to unconfirmed data, the Chinese in 1300 BC and Egyptian in 3000 BC writing systems appeared independently. Ancient Indian, Cretan, and Ethiopian societies also had prerequisites for writing. Hunter-gatherers did not usually have a written language because of a lack of practical necessity. However, there are known cases of complex agricultural societies without writing, such as the Inca state, the maritime proto-empire of Tonga, the Hawaiian state at the end of the 18th century, and others. Writing has always been a factor of additional power, allowing more accurate and complete transmission of information, orders, and statistics. Writing is perceived as another tool of conquest, along with guns, disease, and centralized political organization. The gap in technological development between different societies, according to Diamond, can be explained by two main factors: the random appearance of geniuses and the degree to which society is receptive to new ideas and technologies. Inventions arise as a response to unmet societal needs to solve pressing problems. However, the success of inventors depends on the extent to which society is willing to put their ideas into practice. Society's receptivity, innovation, and openness to the new, which depends on a variety of socioeconomic and attitudinal factors, can vary both within a society and from one society to another. Technologies do not develop in separate spurts, but gradually. Two important milestones can be distinguished in the history of technology development. The first great leap forward is the formation of speech and thinking, thanks to which new types and forms of tools appeared. The second leap was the result of the transition to sedentary life and the development of agriculture, which created economic specializations. Some inventions were a natural extension of contact with nature and could have been created in different places and at different times. For example, pottery and ceramics. It was more difficult with the invention of the mill wheel and compass. They were invented only once or twice in the Old World and never in the New World. Technology development is fastest in large fertile regions where there are sufficient numbers of potential inventors and competing societies. The spread of technologies is carried out both by direct borrowing and through cultural diffusion, mutual penetration. Both options depend on geographical location and natural obstacles. These factors have led to differences in the technological development of the continents. As technology developed, this gap widened, and by 1492, Eurasia's not insignificant initial advantage had turned into absolute leadership. And all this, Diamond believes, was the result of its geographical parameters. The simplest classification of human societies is their division into communities, tribes, chiefdoms, and states. They differ in size and in the level of development of political, economic, and social institutions. As the tasks facing society become more complex and the population grows, community or tribal organization becomes ineffective, and society moves to a new stage of its development. At the chiefdom level, a leader emerges with a monopoly on violence and information, but most importantly, decision-making. At the same time, a system of redistribution of resources is formed. It is at this stage that the problem of abuse of power and resources for personal purposes arises for the first time. In the states, these tendencies intensify. The administrative and bureaucratic apparatus grows. Economic specialization deepens. Internal conflicts are resolved within the framework of law, legal proceedings, and law enforcement system. Persons who have seized central power gradually strengthen their position and form an elite. The elite almost inevitably sets up a system of redistribution of resources in such a way that, on the one hand, it pacifies ordinary people by providing them with services they cannot pay for on their own, and on the other hand, it directs public wealth into the pockets of the upper classes. The difference between a fair political elite and kleptocrats is only in the amount of resources distributed in their favor. Another way to maintain popular support, which kleptocrats resort to, is to create an ideology that justifies military actions, unequal distribution of wealth, forming in the people a sense of patriotism and willingness to sacrifice for the success of external conquests. By accepting bloodshed in wars, society strengthened its ability to make conquests and repel attacks. Thus, the tandem of state and religion acts as another tool of expansion. A study of the cause and effect relationships from the transition to agriculture and pastoralism to all the other factors that led to inequalities between continents shows that the development of human societies varied from continent to continent. Thus, those peoples who were fortunate enough to find themselves in the most favorable conditions and to be the first to take the path that led to the development of technology had the advantage. These countries retained their dominant position today. The states that today are becoming influential powers, as well as countries with high GDP per capita, belong to regions that thousands of years ago were included in the orbit of influence of the first agrarian centers, or were repopulated by natives of such centers as China, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, European countries, the United States, and Brazil. The main conclusions can be summarized as follows. Human societies are in constant competition, leading to the absorption of some communities by others. This makes it necessary to find ways to progress and technological development. Resources must be carefully managed, as their depletion can lead to a loss of leadership. Despite all the initial advantages, it is important to find a balance between consolidation and fragmentation, control and freedom of action in the generation and realization of original ideas. This is a key condition for the development of innovation and maximizing competitiveness both at the state level and at the level of individual companies, businesses. For example, China's excessive political consolidation has repeatedly become a brake on its path to development, while fragmentation and competition on the European continent promoted search, innovation, and discovery. Microsoft, made up of small semi-autonomous units operating with greater freedom and competing with each other, has become a global leader, while IBM, which has chosen the path of increasing centralization, has lost its position. However, excessive fragmentation can also be harmful. For example, Germany's numerous breweries cater mainly to the local consumer, which protects them from competition but also prevents them from expanding outward. The same can be said of the Japanese food industry. They are fixated on the domestic market. Geography is the science that studies the surface of the earth and the surrounding and underlying layers of matter that together form the geographical envelope. Determinism is the philosophical doctrine of the universal lawful interrelationship and causality of all phenomena. According to this doctrine, any event or state of an object in the present or future is determined by its previous state and events. Let us recall the question posed to Jared Diamond by a politician named Yali. How did members of Western civilization accumulate so much cargo, wealth, and bring it to New Guinea? Why did we blacks have so little cargo of our own? With his book, Diamond not only tried to describe the stages and mechanisms of the development of civilization, but also simply reassured Yali by saying that it was all about geography. It was the moment of human settlement in the distant past that arranged all the pieces on the board of the world political and economic arena. That is, the development of a kind of matter such as civilization, according to Diamond, is mainly dependent on another kind of matter on the planet. However, what if Jared Diamond is wrong? After all, it is impossible to explain the civilization process by geography alone. We have before us classical geographical determinism. Now the focus, according to Diamond, everything comes down to an autocatalytic loop, a self-sustaining reaction that made rapid development only those who settled once in a fortunate place. According to many historians, Diamond quite unfairly lumps together vast Eurasia, which is geographically quite different. In addition, Diamond does not answer why fell Sumerian civilization, which had a surprisingly successful start. After all, they had plenty of food, but where are they now? That's right, they dropped out of the civilization race a long time ago. Now you will understand the context of this question. Even before Diamond, many thinkers and economists have tried to explain the prosperity of certain countries by attributing it to geographical location. This approach, at first glance, seems very appealing and logical. One of the first to succumb to this temptation was the philosopher Charles Montesquieu. He attempted to establish a link between climate and the industriousness of a population. Montesquieu, who might not seem politically correct by today's standards, suggested that the inhabitants of tropical countries were naturally lazy, which led to the stagnation of their economies and the despotism of their rulers. But even then, this viewpoint had its opponents. Voltaire briefly commented on Montesquieu's ideas as follows: "Climate certainly has a certain influence, but the power of governments is many times greater than it." Among modern proponents of the geographical theory is, who would have thought, Jared Diamond. In his books Guns, Germs, and Steel and Collapse, he argues that the main reason for economic differences between countries is the availability of animals and plants that can be domesticated. Thus, some societies moved from hunting and gathering to sedentary agriculture earlier than others, which subsequently affected their economic development. However, the flaws of geographical reductionism and determinism cannot be hidden. How can we explain that, for example, less fertile North America is now much richer than South America? Or why the countries in which the Neolithic Revolution, the transition to production, took place earlier than others are now much poorer than other nations? Obviously, the answer does not lie in geography. Moreover, under certain circumstances, a favorable geographical position can have a destructive effect on economic development. Economists even have such a notion as resource curse when a country rich in natural resources successfully exports them, having shifted the qualitative development of the economy to the background. The population is satisfied, as the government generously shares with them the profits from the sale of resources. But the same government gradually rolls back democratic procedures. This is how resource autocracies are born. Not surprisingly, historians and economists have no consensus on the geographical factor. In addition to geographical determinism, the argument of culture is quite common. One can often hear the opinion that the success of Asian economies is related to their culture. Confucian values are usually cited as an example, which are believed to have been the basis for the economic growth of China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. However, on closer examination, this argument proves to be untenable. The American economist Gregory Ornatowski, in his work Confucian Values and Economic Development, convincingly shows that the influence of Eastern philosophy on the economy has been ambiguous. Indeed, from a certain point, the Confucian labor ethic began to contribute to the development of Japanese capitalism, but only after it had evolved sufficiently. In the pre-war period, Confucian principles motivated the Japanese to work hard on the one hand, but on the other hand, discouraged the introduction of new ideas. Any economic problems were viewed solely from a moral perspective rather than an economic one. This was not conducive to what in economics is called creative destruction. All this seriously hindered economic development. After the war in Japan, Confucian principles underwent a major change. They ceased to be obstacles to innovation. This made it possible to begin active implementation of advanced technologies that were available at that time. However, this only happened when Japan became fully integrated into the world economy. The history of Taiwan shows that there is not always a direct link between Confucian principles and economic development. Confucian principles play an important role in this country, especially in large state-owned companies. However, research has shown these companies are the least innovative and do not play a significant role in Taiwan's economic development. The growth of Taiwan's economy is driven by small and medium-sized enterprises, which are responsible for 50 to 70% of exports. Research shows that these companies have a neutral or even negative attitude to Confucian principles, considering them a relic of the past that is actively imposed from above. In China, the situation is even simpler. The economic growth achieved by the PRC under Deng Xiaoping was preceded by years of cultural revolution, during which the Communist Party tried to break with traditional values. Today's China, where a communist government runs a capitalist economy, has more in common with Western values than the Chinese themselves are willing to admit. As you can see, even cultural trends cannot fully explain all the complexities of the abrupt change of civilization. We will not stop at the study of the laws by which the mechanism of civilization functions, and will try to think our way into the future. To assess the development of civilization, we can use Kardashian Scale. The scale divides civilizations into three types. The first type uses all available energy resources on its planet. The second type uses the energy of its star. The third type uses the energy of its galaxy. It is also proposed to expand the scale to Type 4, capable of using the resources of the entire universe, and Type 5, controlling an arbitrary set of universes, that is multiverse, For the first time, this scale was proposed by Soviet radio astronomer Nikolai Kardashev in the work Transfer of Information to Extraterrestrial Civilizations, published in the Astronomical Journal of the USSR in 1964. For the civilization of the first type is characterized by energy consumption, which is comparable to the power received by the planet from the central star and energy sources of the planet itself. For example, that's how many watts is the total energy the Earth receives from the Sun. One hypothetical form of Type 2 civilization is a civilization that has built a Dyson Sphere around its star. The Dyson Sphere is an astro-engineering project proposed in the 60s by theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson. It is a relatively thin spherical shell of large radius with a central star. By Dyson's own admission, the idea of a sphere first appeared in Olaf Stapledon's sci-fi novel Star Maker. It is assumed that a technologically advanced civilization can use such or similar structures to maximize the use of energy of the central star. Our failure to detect Dyson spheres serves as one of the confirmations of the Fermi paradox. And it's not surprising. Theoretical calculations show that the construction of a Dyson sphere around the Sun requires matter with a mass of about Jupiter. The estimated radius of the Dyson sphere is between 50 and 250 million kilometers. The Earth's radius, by comparison, is 6,300 kilometers. The power consumption of a Type 3 civilization is roughly equal to that of a galaxy. An estimate of the luminosity of the radiation flux for our Milky Way galaxy is 2 times 10 to the 10th degree of solar luminosity, or about 8 times 10 to the 36th degree of watts. The energy consumption of a non-inclusive Type 4 theory is equal to the power of the entire universe. For reference, the energy of the entire universe is about 10 to the 50th degree of watts. Kardashev apparently created a trend. Later, a more detailed typology of civilization was proposed by the German writer Helge Kautz. Civilizations of Type 0 are pre-industrial societies, or at best are in the early stages of space exploration. They use a significant part of the available energy resources of their planet, which can be compared to the state of humanity at the beginning of the 21st century. Civilization of the first type is a planetary civilization that fully utilizes the resources of its planet. It colonizes the planets of its star system, turning them into resource colonies. However, this stage often becomes a trap for it. The civilization reaches a state of self-sufficiency, devoting resources to the development of virtual worlds instead of further expansion. Many civilizations of the first type cease to exist due to catastrophic changes in the home star, such as its transformation into a new or supernova star. Type 2 civilizations are very rare matter that have been around for at least thousands of years. They use all the available energy of their star system and are capable of interstellar travel and colonization of planets in other star systems. These civilizations are past their transitional age. At this point, their chances for continued development increase dramatically. A civilization of the third type can harness the energy of the entire galaxy. Such civilizations exist for at least a few million years and are rare even on a universal scale. They are likely to be very few in number. A civilization of the fourth type is a civilization that can harness the entire available energy of galactic superscopes. A Type 5 civilization is a civilization that has gained access to all the energy of the universe. Type 6 civilization can harness the energy of multiple universes, alter their physics, and even prevent the heat death of the home universe, and so exists forever. In any case, it is not always the desire for territorial and energy conquests that indicates the development of a civilization. On the contrary, it can hold back progress. Even on our planet, there are examples of countries such as Hong Kong, Japan, and the Netherlands, where the scarcity of territory encourages the search for new ways to develop the economy and improve agricultural methods. This pushes science and economics to make new advances. For example, the Netherlands is the leading food exporter in Europe and second in the world after the US. However, if we look at Kardashian Scale and its similar gradations, on the other hand, we can understand that linking the level of civilization with the energy it is able to use is just silly. The choice of scale, of typology, determines the assessment of what level a civilization is at and where it is headed in the future. In his book, Cosmic Connection, An Extraterrestrial Perspective, published in 1973, the famous physicist and popularizer of science Carl Sagan proposed to add one more parameter to the classification of levels of civilization development. According to Kardashian, the information available to the civilization. The letter A in this classification denotes 106 unique bits of information. This is less than the amount of information available to any recorded human culture. Each subsequent letter in the classification means an order of magnitude increase. Therefore, a level Z civilization would have 1031 bits of information. According to this classification, Earth in 1973 was a 0.7H level civilization that had access to 1013 bits of information. Sagan believed that no civilization had reached level Z, suggesting that this amount of information would exceed the amount of information of all intelligent species in the galactic supercluster. He also noted that the universe is too young to effectively exchange information over long distances. In other words, all the time since the Big Bang, intelligent species in the universe have not yet reached the necessary level of development. It is likely that many of them are still in their early stages of development, including humans. The information and energy axes do not always correlate, so even a Z-level civilization will not necessarily correspond to the third type according to Kardashian, and vice versa. Absolutely opposite to Kardashian, with his gigantomania, is the idea of civilization development of English physicist, mathematician, and popularizer of science John Barrow. In his book Impossibility, The Limits of Science and the Science of Limits, he questioned the very necessity of spatial expansion, which is usually accepted as something obvious. People tend to believe that it is necessary to explore more and more territories, planets and star systems, and so on ad infinitum. This principle of expansion can be traced in many works of science fiction. The more space a civilization captures, the more successful it looks. John Barrow was the first to point out that such a worldview may be outdated. In practice, people value more the ability to control the environment on a smaller scale, rather than a larger scale. Therefore, he proposed an alternative classification of civilizations from type 1- to type omega-. Type 1- are able to manipulate objects at the scale of themselves, to build structures, to mine minerals, to join and destroy solids. Type 2- is able to manipulate genes and alter the development of living things, transplant and replace parts of themselves, read and create their genetic code. Type 3- is able to manipulate molecules and molecular bonding, creating new materials. Type 4- is able to manipulate individual atoms, create atom-scale nanotechnology, and create complex forms of artificial life. Type 5- is able to manipulate the atomic nucleus and create the nucleons that make up it. Type 6- is able to manipulate the elementary particles of matter, quarks and leptons, to create organized complexity among populations of elementary particles. Type omega- is capable of controlling the basic structure of space and time. According to this classification, human civilization is somewhere between types 1- and 2-. And who will say that the control of space and time is less significant indicator of development than the development of other planets? In addition to expanding control, the sphere of humanity can expand. Earlier, the sphere of humanity covered only members of one's tribe, clan, and family. Ancient people had no sympathy for the others and did not recognize them as their equals, and sometimes did not even take them for human beings. Gradually, humanity began to extend to neighboring tribes, and with the emergence of states and religions, and to people of their own nationality and faith. In the 19th century came the realization that all people in the world have the same rights, regardless of race, nationality, and religion. We began to realize that they were all just like us and to feel sympathy for them. Around the same time, equality of rights began to be extended to women and children. In the 21st century, the scope of humanity began to expand to pets and other mammals such as monkeys, dolphins, cows, and others. On July 7, 2012, 25 leading neurobiologists, neurophysiologists, and psychiatrists from around the world gathered in Cambridge and officially recognized the existence of consciousness in animals. It can be assumed that in the future the sphere of humanity will extend to all animals without exception, and then, perhaps, to plants. If we follow this way, then in the distant future the spread of the sphere of humanity will probably include complex mechanisms and objects of inanimate nature. It is difficult for today's man to imagine the thinking of a man of the future with such life values. But it is also difficult for us, if we are honest, to imagine the thinking of the man of antiquity. In the 21st century, humanity faces a serious challenge. Before our eyes, but partly through our own fault, the planet's climate is changing rapidly. Fortunately, while the extinction of mankind is not foreseen, but cataclysms that will affect billions of people and lead to unpredictable social and historical consequences seem almost inevitable. But the climate has changed repeatedly in history, and mass extinctions, including those caused by living organisms, such as the oxygen holocaust, have occurred with inviolable regularity. The bright difference in our time is that we are the first living organisms to think about the future and try to make a difference. Let me spell out the obvious fact. Before humans existed, no one even thought about climate. Yes, humans can be greedy, cowardly, and aggressive. But if ants had even a tenth of our resources, they would have turned the Earth into a radioactive desert, leaving nothing alive. Man is just an animal, but unlike other creatures, he is not indifferent to what is happening around and within him. He is not indifferent to what was before and will be after, to the past and the future. Man is boldly looking in the mirror, and in my opinion, that is something we can be proud of. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, put likes, subscribe to the channel, leave comments, and share this video with your loved ones. It helps a lot.